Hello and welcome to our first discussion, hopefully one of many, where we'll be talking about the economic manifestation of gender-based violence. Of course, I want to send a special shout out for the National Research Foundation and the Sweden in SA Embassy for giving us this platform and allowing us to actually have this conversation. Of course, from a speaker's note, let me introduce myself. My name is Anlisa Tuso. I'm a business journalist by profession, but I think for today, I'm a sister, I'm a mother, I'm a woman, and I'm an aunt to three beautiful children. I think the discussion that we're having today is really one that touches a lot of people in society. If you've not experienced gender-based violence or exclusion of women in society, it's either you've seen it, it's either you've experienced it, or it's either you've actually been part of the problem. So today, I want us to actually get into this discussion and see how we can pave it forward. According to the UN, in the last 6 or 7 months of the pandemic across the globe, we've seen an actual increase. We've seen an actual increase in terms of the gender-based violence. And this is not just in terms of the physical part of it, but in all aspects of gender-based violence. There's been so many violations of women's rights across the board. So I think the bulk of our discussion today is also quite personal, because when you look at the UN announcement that there's an increase in gender-based violence, it seems like there's a pandemic to the that we're currently facing. Of course, like I said, I'm not alone in this discussion. I'll be joined in by a number of speakers, amazing people from different parts of the world who will actually also be contributing to this discussion. One of the things that I want us to also get used to it is, if you're joining us on Facebook, do drop us a question. And if you're joining us on Zoom, also drop it on the Q&A button. Just drop your question there. If you're joining us on Facebook, but you are on Twitter, do tweet us or follow our hashtag. Our hashtag is we must do better. So we must do better. Do better. That's the hashtag that we're following. Of course, like I said, I'm not alone. I'm joined in by a number of speakers with me. I'll just go through the speakers now, and they'll formally introduce themselves later. And sorry, I lost my speaker's notes. All right, so like I said, I'm not alone. I'm joined by Nikki Scott, and I'm also joined by Jean-Paul Kloppers. I'm also joined by Libalo Chemolane and Wesley Van de Beek. Of course, they'll formally introduce themselves later, but for now, we will hand over to the ambassador, who will also give us his formal welcoming note, because of course, like I said, this is a joint partnership between the Sweden and SA Embassy and the National Research Foundation. So I'll hand over to you, Ambassador, to just do a bit of a welcome note, but also maybe give us a few words on why this discussion is quite important.
Thank you, Anna-Lisa. Thank you so much. And my name is Håkan Juholt, and I've been ambassador for Sweden here in South Africa for just 8 weeks now. So not so long time, but already realized how important our cooperation is and what we can do together. I'm a father of 2 sons, and I'm a husband. Also, me myself, I'm also a son raised by a very strong mother, but also a very careful and loving father. I would like also to thank all the viewers for tuning in to this event, both on the Field to Capacity webinar and live on the partner's Facebook page. Sweden and South Africa have a historic relationship of collaboration in the fight for human rights and sustainable futures for all, dating back to the struggle and the movement against apartheid. I was, as a young teenager, also part of that movement, collecting money in collecting boxes all over Sweden to support political freedom and democracy in South Africa. Moving ahead to present times, where our friendship and collaboration continues in work to inspire people to consider a range of contexts, including one of the greatest challenges facing society today, violence against women and children. When South Africa, in March this year, introduced the lockdown, my predecessor and we at the Swedish Embassy realized we needed to find new channels for our work, dialogue, discussion, and reaching out. We decided to launch a series of Facebook live stream talks with South African and Swedish experts and named it Digitally Yours. So far, I'm pleased to tell you that that series has had more than 260,000 views. That's absolutely amazing. And today's theme, economic manifestations of gender-based violence, is one that we feel so strongly about. As a country with a feminist government, which includes a feminist foreign policy and feminist trade policy, gender equality is central to all priorities, and it is a core priority of Sweden to protect the rights of women and children, to lead efforts in strengthening gender equality and at all times combating all forms of violence. Sweden's position is that gender-based violence is the most extreme expression of unequal gender relations in society. It is first and foremost a violation of human rights and a global health issue that cuts across boundaries of economic wealth, culture, religion, age, and sexual orientation. Wherever gender-based violence occurs, serious threats are aiming towards democratic and sustainable development, economic growth, public health, and peace. And it goes, I must say, without saying, that if women and children are not safe, then they cannot be full citizens nor fully participate in the development of their own societies. Frankly, it does not make macroeconomic sense to exclude women from the economy. Finally, in my opening remarks here, I would just like to point out that in my own country, we still have a long way to go. But over the years, policies have helped shift norms towards improvement of working conditions and consumer experiences of women, promoting women's economic empowerment, equal access to markets, and also transforming norms around gender relations and masculinity, enabling men and boys to become agents, ambassadors of that change. Men's greater involvement in care work also brings economic benefits to both families and the country as a whole. When women participate in the labor market to the same extent as men, it has a clear positive impact Am I back? I think I would, yeah.
All right.
And
you back and back with it.
Yeah, and I have said I would like to reach out thanks to the excellent panel for participating in this most crucial discussion, to the men in social media campaign that will continue on our page until the 10th of December, who are speaking out against gender-based violence. And thanks to you, the NRF, for once again partnering with the embassy to produce a research-rich campaign. Our work together is a true testament of our strong ties and the strong ties between our countries, our nations, and our people, and that we share so important values, and that the difference partnership can make a fostering productive collaboration for sustainable development for a better future in both our countries. I look forward to this panel discussion, and especially the engagement from the audience, as the creation of this platform was essentially for a two-way conversation in the absence of not being able to meet eye to eye in person. So thanks to all of you taking part in this webinar, and I hope that we will achieve common sense and that we will find also a pathway together to the future, including boys and girls in that society that we actually would like to live together in. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you so much, Ambassador. I think that was quite that was a lot, and I think we must just hand over quickly for the word of support to Dr. Beverly Damante. If you can, Doc, please keep it as short. We've already ran out and gave the ambassador a bit of time.
Thank you, Annalisa. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, Ambassador. Pleased to meet you. And thank you very much for the engagements we have had over a number of years, as you've outlined. We were just not so long ago, before you joined, in conversation, both NRF and the Embassy of Sweden in Pretoria, in conversation with the nation around the meaning of science in COVID-19, where we had Dr. Tegnell and Professor Abdul Karim speaking to us around the issues of science in a pandemic. And I think it's equally important that our partnership takes us to conversations about another shadowy pandemic, which is running alongside the COVID pandemic. And this is the manifestation of gender-based violence on our societies. For the NRF, we are very much supporting research and conversations and dialogue about the relationship between science and society, that science in a society which is marred by injustice and imbalanced gender relationships, by fear and anxiety and extreme forms of violence, that we would have to continue to find ways to address this pandemic, the shadow pandemic. Science may be the answer, but I think this that crosses all boundaries, whether they are economic, gender, whether the country or in the village. We are going to have to continue to find ways to protect the rights of women and children, to strengthen gender equality, and really, really address ways to eradicate all forms of violence. So thank you very much for this opportunity. Thank you to our panelists, and I look forward to the conversations this afternoon.
All right, thank you so much. That was Dr. Beverly Damante from the NRF. And of course, thanks again to the ambassador. I think before I even get into the formal introduction of our speakers, I just want to remind you guys again, please do follow our discussion, hashtag we must do better. And the two handles that you can follow right now, we are at Sweden in SA, that's one word, and at NRF_news. Please share your views. If you feel like there's something that we haven't followed, follow the conversation through. And if you feel like there's something that you'd like to add, please do say on that hashtag. There's a team on the ground that's actually monitoring the discussion. So now we start the discussion. Like I said, my name is Annalisa, business journalist by profession, but today I'm the moderator. So I'm standing in between the speakers and I'm making sure that we get the discussion going. Like I said, I'm not alone. I'm joined by Nikki Scott. Nikki is from the Commercial Transport Academy. I'm joined by Jean-Paul Kloppers. He's from the Save Children South Africa. I'm also joined by Libalo Chomelane from the University of Western Cape and Wesley van der Berg from Sonke Gender Justice. I'm going to try and get the speakers to introduce themselves. We'll start with Nikki, and then we'll go to Libalo, and then we'll go to Wesley, and then we'll go to JP. Please, with my speakers, keep it under 1 minute. Nikki.
Thank you so much. So I'm a social entrepreneur. I'm a transport expert and specialist of 24 years in the industry. And these days I specialize in and focus on empowering women to lead in the transport sector. I also assist our organizations implement change management and change leadership strategies to accomplish their targets and their gender diversity targets and employment equity targets. I'm a mom, a wife, a mentor, and I'm a researcher. I've completed my master's and currently continue to do research into the underdevelopment and the underrepresentation of women in the transport sector and other non-traditional occupations.
All right, thank you so much, Nikki. Libalo?
Hello, everyone. My name is Libalo Jamulani. Originally from Soweto. I always like saying I'm originally from Soweto just to make people aware that Soweto is not a hub of thieves and thugs. There is a lot that comes out from there. And I'm a researcher. I'm very much interested in social justice. And my area of work focuses on looking at where justice is, where power and privilege is at play. And I'm using masculinity to engage with this. And for me, looking at masculinity post 1994 has given so much insight into where South Africa is and where it is going. And I think with that brief introduction, as we continue the discussion, more will come out as who I am and where I'm all about. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much. Wesley?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Wessel van den Berg. I am a father of 2 young children. I'm a partner to my wife, and that's my main job. My second job is to work at Sonke Gender Justice for the other 8 hours of each day. And I am one of the founders and a steering committee member for the Men Care Global Fatherhood Campaign. It's lovely to be with everyone.
All right. And then JP?
Thank you. I'm glad to be part of this panel. Thank you for inviting me. My name is Jean-Paul Kloppers. I'm the research manager at Save the Children South Africa. So my focus there is on applied research. So our organization works in different thematic areas, including child rights, governance, health and nutrition, and also child protection. So my focus there is checking and assessing how our programs work so that we use evidence-based programming in our work. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much to our speakers. But just a quick reminder again, don't forget to actually follow us on Twitter. The handle is @SwedenInSA. And for the NRF page, you can follow it @NRF_news. #WeMustDoBetter. All right. I think it's time for us to actually start the discussion now. Like I said, I want to start the discussion on a broader scale. And this is where Lebalo and I will actually just give us a bit of foundation in this discussion. The discussion I wanted to start on is around masculinity. Where are we in terms of masculinity post-1996? Lebalo, this is where your research focused on. Where are we? Because I want to talk about the unintended intentions of masculinity.
Okay, thank you very much, Annalisa. Talking about masculinity post-1994 and not considering the historical development of South Africa will not be doing justice to the issue. I strongly believe that issues around masculinity and the gender landscape of South Africa is very much being influenced by where we've been, where we are, and where we hope to be. And with that, the project of feminism seeks justice and equality for all. And I would say that South Africa has not been ready, and it has taken South Africa by shock. And this has been visible through all that has been happening in South Africa. My work seeks to dismantle toxic masculinity. And toxic masculinity's assumption is that there's only one type of masculinity, and that's a lie. And that's what's making us to become the kind of men we are. Informed by religion and culture, we justify our actions. And those are, for me, they hinge on the issues of power and privilege. And those are issues which we fail to engage with because they shake our comfort. And the more we speak and we challenge issues of power and privilege, the more we get rid of all the things or the imaginings that we have about ourselves. And I feel that if we can be honest and sincere and engage from a more transformative point of view, we can somehow seek ways and find ways of somehow getting to the bottom. And for us to get to where we want to be, we need to understand and be honest about where we are. Unless we are honest about that, I don't think that issues in masculinity and all that has been happening, gender-based violence and all the violences committed by men can be somehow tackled. But the important thing is to understand and to be honest and accept that we need to be honest as men. We need to somehow identify that we are somehow contributing to what it is in our day-to-day living, in how we speak, in how we engage with each other. And South Africa is transforming and we need to understand that we are in the making of history. And South Africa is what it is today because of a number of revolutions. And at this point in time, I think there's another revolution which is calling us to give attention to. And that is, yeah. Thank you.
I want Vessel to jump in on this because you mentioned something quite important, which is it's our daily lives. We see it at home, we see it at work, we see it everywhere. Wesley, you are at Sonke gender-based gender justice. You see this every day. You're with the man on the ground. What are some of the unintended intentions of masculinity? What do men say on the ground when you speak to them?
Thank you so much, Annalisa. You know, before I speak about what's happening at a household level, let me be quite clear that if we're talking about gender-based violence, we don't see incidences of gender-based violence in spite of our society. We see incidences of gender-based violence because of our society, in terms of how our society is framed in a patriarchal way. And I think if you speak about the unintended consequences of a patriarchal system, I think, you know, I would challenge that a little bit and say that there is some intention there. I think, you know, when we think about households living in South Africa, we cannot ignore the fact that COVID is upon us. And within the COVID pandemic, you know, the social relief that was provided to those who were applying for social protection mostly benefited men, while it was mostly women who needed it. And I think that's one manifestation of violence against women, because women were economically excluded and they were the ones who needed it the most. At a household level, working with fathers, working on care, you know, what we've observed is this polarization between mothers who are carrying the burden of care and breadwinning on their own, and on the other side, fathers who feel excluded and are asking for access to children as a condition before they pay child maintenance. And these two seem to be moving further and further apart as a polarized debate in South Africa.
This is where JP must come in, actually, because JP, you deal with children a lot, and I want you to actually just maybe give us some insight on what you've seen on your side, what happens to the children when they come from a family where there's a history of gender-based violence, or where they experience gender-based violence and see that in their presence.
Yeah, the data on that is quite shocking, actually. Violence begets violence. So it's not automatic that where there is violence within a household, so it's exposure by children to violence will result in violence. But it certainly is a risk factor, and the outcomes are negative in terms of their health outcomes, behavioral outcomes, and the danger is that what they experience as a young person persists with them as they get older, and this has implications for the way our economy works. So people then perpetrate that violence again later on in life. So essentially, children exposed to violence, even if it's witnessing violence, they don't have to have been physically abused, even though the costs associated with that are very high. Even witnessing violence, emotional abuse, these kinds of violence that are maybe not so obviously recognized as being violence, definitely have important impacts on children's development.
I think we've set out the socio-economic part of it. I think we've outlined where the problem is. We've outlined what the broader patriarchal, English has run away, guys, and it's still in the discussion. The patriarchal part of it, and what masculinity can do in a socio-economic aspect. But I want to bring Nikki in, because Nikki, you've got a research that shows the exclusion, which is a different kind of violence for women, actually. What that has actually done in terms of getting women into the room, the exclusion of women in broader conversations. how the system on its own genuinely has served the other gender. I'll call you guys other gender, you'll forgive me, the other gender. And its intentions, while may not have been, like I keep on using the word unintended, but I keep on using that word, but I know there are spaces where you get in, but there's an intention to deliberately leave you out of it. Nikki, maybe you can jump in for me there.
Yeah. So while there are organizations that have implemented brilliant policies to change status quo and to have a impact on gender diversity, there are enormous amount of organizations in the private sector that haven't. And I focus generally in the non-traditional occupations and more specifically in the transport sector that I want to speak about, because what we're seeing is an unconscious bias that is very prevalent in the recruitment process. Policies, organizational policies that don't support women. So they will say, right, we have a gender diversity drive, we want to attract more women, but then it's isolated from policies and policy intervention processes. Organizations don't go back to the drawing board to have a look to say, well, if we bring women into the organization, are we going to be able to retain them, and are they going to successfully survive and thrive in those positions? I've also experienced a need for men to overprotect women in non-traditional occupations. So that leads to their careers being curbed because they don't get the same opportunities as men. And that causes a tremendous amount of frustration. There's also this organizational frustration that comes from misguided management, where they will, for instance, in the transport sector, say it's too difficult to bring women in because we have to change our policies, our processes, and our systems. And I will often say in response, perhaps bringing women in is highlighting the problems that are in the industry that we have been working with for so long, that have created the stigmas that are associated with some of the non-traditional roles. And the fact that there are problems to you is more for not that women are the problem, that maybe those issues should be addressed at an industry level and at an organizational level. Something else that was quite interesting, and I know that we all know this, is that women in non-traditional occupations very often adopt very masculine traits to survive in those environments. So they lose themselves and they don't actually achieve what we're setting out to achieve, which is to create a more feminine environment, or where femininity is an acceptable trait to have in business. The last thing I want to mention is husbands. You know, with the unemployment rate being as high as it is, male partners and husbands that are unemployed are finding it very challenging to have wives go into non-traditional occupations. There is a level of jealousy. There is a level of insecurity in the household, and this is playing out in these homes. So we have to be very careful while we want to elevate women specifically looks in transport, where the representation is less than 1.2% of the working population is women. And women in transport only make up about 17% of the total working population. So we are still very underrepresented. It looks the same in the construction industry and in the mining industry.
All right, thank you so much, Nikki. I think now you mentioned unemployment, and I think this is where our next segment is going to actually touch base in, because what we've seen in the past is that once women are not economically included, they tend to be more vulnerable. But similar to men, when men aren't economically included or participating in the economy, they tend to be actually more violent. So it's vulnerability versus violence in this case, because I mean, in the last quarter alone, we reported an unemployment rate. In the second quarter, we had 2 million people getting off the economy, and another 2 million people got off the economy. So there's this economy that isn't growing. There's this economy that leaves now so many men in a space where they can't cater. And this is what I want to bring in Libalo on it, on the contribution, on how the economic side of it contributes actually to some of the violence that we see whether it's at home or even just the kind of frustration and anger that tends, and I'm not justifying violence, but I'm saying in an economic sense, once someone is economy excluded, and when we see now the economy isn't growing, we have a problem in our hands.
Can I go back to what I said earlier about one of the assumptions of toxic masculinity, stating that there's one kind of masculinity of which all men should be part of. And I think that's what causes more confusion, and it alienates men from who they are. As individuals who have their own identity politics, they find themselves in a corner. Like within a patriarchal society, men's voices are not as silent as women's voices are, but men's voices on what it means to be a man are not much given attention. And masculinity being influenced by culture and religion with all its precepts and norms that men has to follow has somehow brought a distance between who we are as men and what we live with in our lives. And the greatest challenge where the economy is concerned is where men are said to be providers, where men are said to be leaders, and the space they live in does not give opportunities for that. And that's how does one somehow articulate themselves or find an identity within a space where they're not fully living out or embracing what is called of them. And that escalates and bring much more anger with self, with society, and what the world offers. And what does that do? It breeds animals, I would say. And I'm sorry for saying that, but that's generally what happens. Because if you ask perpetrators of violence, most of them, they don't know what they're doing. They will say, I'm doing this because of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And most of those things are not what they as individuals somehow uphold. Because no one
Vessel,
wants...
I want you to jump in. I want Vessel to jump in quickly because you had Sonke gender-based violence. I'll always come to you because you've got the experience of people on the ground. Libalo mentioned that there's not just the bigger problem now is the definition of what being a man is. In a society where the economy isn't growing, in a society that defines a man or the value of a man by what he brings to the table or what how do we now program or reprogram our man? And I'm saying our man because I'm a sister to a man. How do we program our men to actually see themselves outside the exclusion, one, that they can't participate in the economy, but how do we help men in that context so that when they walk out of the house, they don't carry the burden that they can no longer participate in the economy because the economy isn't growing?
Lebalo, I hope you're okay. I think we can pick up on what you were saying when we come back into the discussion later. Thanks, Annalisa. You know, I really want to underscore what Nikki said earlier, that a woman who wants to ascend the corporate ladder faces a dilemma. She either has to conform to the male space that's at the center, or she has to enter as a woman and then always be confined as the woman's voice. And in neither of those scenarios is she participating as an equal around the table. The problem is not what's happening around the table, it's about how society is framed and what determines the margin and the center. So I'd like to share something here, which is a picture of what I think could equalize the playing field. I hope you can see that. This is an image that's a twist on quite a familiar feminist image of a man doing care work. And I think if a key problem for us is that women are tied to being caregivers. And if men do care work, and if South Africa provides universal daycare for children, that would liberate women from the association with care work and enable them to participate more economically. So I think that's what we're seeing in a lot of households. So to answer your question specifically, I think the notion of provision is so entrenched that it's really unlikely that we can remove that from men's identity. But what we can do is we can expand it. We can say provision is not only about financial provision. And let's be clear, that is important. It is important that the man who can does play a financial role. But let's expand that to include the things like childcare, supporting the child walking to school, taking the child for immunization, because when there is a mother, that releases her to be able to engage economically. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. And I mean, I want to bring in JP just before we close this segment and then look at the question or the Q&A box. You deal with children again, and we're talking about raising children who are going to be, children eventually become adults. And in a society where the children themselves grow up watching broken adults, how do we make sure, JP, that we're raising full children, children who aren't broken, children, male children also, because this also includes males in the conversations. How do you make sure that we raise the kind of men that don't only accommodate women at home, but also the kind of men that when they walk into the boardroom on their first job, they also become active or active feminists, because I'm a firm believer that men actually can be feminists too.
Thank you. So the way I'll say the children approaches this issue is to focus on the rights of the child. And one of the things that we are particularly interested in is that children are not experiencing violence because of these later consequences that they experience in life. So there are different kinds of programs that exist to reduce household violence, but the ones that we are focusing, the ones that we follow in particular on positive parenting. So that's about having closer relationships between the parents and the child so that those bonds are there. So this is crucial for the child's development, and so that they learn positive ways of being in the world. Because experiencing violence means that they don't have good role models, so that when they are older, we have those negative outcomes that we associate with that. So the issue of violence is a really important issue because it's so pervasive in our society. It's not just in the household where children experience violence, which is an important thing, but also in schools, in communities, and so on. So the answer of how to address it, that's how we as an organization do it, but it's also important to change cultural norms and attitudes towards gender roles because of the influence that this has in perpetuating violence. So, for example, I mean, we've touched on it in different ways, but that idea of frustrated masculinity. If men are expected to be the household provider, but then they don't have work, then that means it creates stress for men, which brings stress to the household, which can result in violence towards women and towards children, both of which are bad. So I've touched a little bit on how to address it, but essentially we need prevention programs to prevent violence, and we also need support programs so that victims of violence are supported, so that exposure to violence doesn't necessarily mean one will perpetuate violence, but the risk increases. So through support programs, we can reduce that risk. So ultimately, my thoughts on this are that we want to try and break that cycle of violence as far as we can.
All right, I want to bring Nikki in quickly before we close off this session. Nikki, what can corporates, or I don't want to say corporate South Africa because there's a global conversation in this. What can corporates, in terms of addressing the gender-based side of it, because a lot of corporates there's a certain quota in terms of addressing how many people get into, how many women you get, in what management level, but there's a policy that is lacking in most companies, which is making sure that a victim of gender-based violence is actually protected even at work, because there are a lot of things that happen at home that those things actually do follow you at home. Do you have probably any suggestions in terms of policies maybe that we can even look at in just addressing that aspect of it?
You know, I was reading up on that this morning because I wanted to comment on that. It's a very challenging environment because in order to create a culture where people feel safe to a woman. Now let's go. I mean, gender-based violence affects men and women, but for them to feel safe, you've really got to have an organizational culture that is built on that environment where you know that you can come to a superior and that would be dealt with in a sensitive manner. Some organizations have gone to the effort of putting in policies. There has been training at supervisory leadership management levels where they can be more aware and take responsibility for their teams and to identify possible victims of gender-based violence. But it requires a tremendous amount of effort and work, and it's tremendously rewarding, I must say that, because the cost to economy and the cost to organizations for staff not coming to work, staff not being productive, not being able to really fulfill their roles or their value to their organizations because they're dealing with these demons of what's happening at home. It's important that organizations get behind this. I think that all organizations, I speak a lot to the private sectors, but they really need to get on board and to make it possible for people to feel very safe in their workspace, to be able to come forth and ask for support, ask for time off, ask for counseling, and ask for what they actually need to get through it. I'd love to bring in the conversation around what we've been doing, but I think that'll come after the Q&A. Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yes. All right. I think we're done with this round, and I really want to bring in the viewers now because we've got a couple of questions in the box. Here's how people can actually ask their question. I just want to remind people on how you do it. If you've got a question for a specific person, if you've got a question for Nikki, say question for Nikki so that Nikki is able to take the question for you. If you've got a question for JP, just say JP. I see we've got a couple of questions already. Let me just go through the questions now so that we are able to just accommodate some of the questions. I won't take a lot of questions because we don't have enough time, but I'm just on the chat box now. There's a question for, just please use Senator. There's a question for Lebalo. It says, I recently learned that the Department of Transport in South Africa found that the taxi industry, which is mostly male-dominated, adds heavily to the prevalence of violence towards women, so that the department has trained some taxi operators on GBV, and these operators have been given certificates. Even though you might now know how much was taught to these operators, how should government and mainstream media teach specifically people in this male-dominated industry to understand that women are equal citizens? So the question is, I'll repeat it, how should government and mainstream media teach especially people in this male-dominated industry to understand that women are equal? Lebalo, this was for you. How do we get governments now and the mainstream media to teach men, but also specifically the male-dominated industry, that women are equal? I think Nikki will also jump in on this one because Lebalo and Nikki can also help each other because Nikki is on the previously known as a male-dominated industry.
One of my greatest concerns with initiatives to deal with toxic masculinities and gender-based violence is the question that, are men asked? Do questions come to men as to why are they doing what they're doing? Or is it from an outsider, insider perspective? And is there a space where men are really engaged with to somehow let them come with solutions instead of solutions being imposed on them? Because this is what has been happening with constructions of masculinities. It has been a social construction which we all swallow without engaging with it. And why I say that is the importance of really asking life what life is in order to find questions and solutions to them. Because it's difficult. Sometimes we think that the issue we understand from an outsider's perspective without really engaging. Looking at the taxi industry, I grew up in Soweto, and the industry, I've always feared taxi drivers because they are always attached to a certain cultural background, which is known to be violent, which is known to uphold a certain kind of masculinity. And it has been a space which has been dominated by that construct. And one of the questions I saw is religion and culture. How much are we engaging with what religious and cultural discourses are prescribing for us to become men? It's good and fair to come with initiatives and come with ways of dealing with issues. But then are we going to the core of what generate those issues? And I very much believe that religio-cultural discourses are very much at the core, because with this, there's issues of power, there's issues of privilege. And without engaging with those, I think that it will be very difficult to somehow deal with issues for what they are. Because once we touch on those, people run away, people stop talking. Because even with my research was inspired by a survey where men were asked, who is pro-gender equity? 95% or 99% said yes. But as it was broken down, the percentage decreased. And why is it so? And are the questions asked, why are men behaving the way they are? And I don't know. I think as I'm going through and I realize and I talk to men from their lived experiences, there's more to be engaged with than what we imagine or we think are the solution. For us to find sustainable solutions, we need to go to the core experiences in a constructive way and very honestly, because power and privilege is the issue which is central to gendered issues, and engaging those touches on what we think we are. And if what we think we are is dismantled, we think we lose ourselves and we forget. Yeah.
All right. I have to jump into our next question. And you mentioned power and policy. Power and
privilege.
Policy. Power, privilege, and bring in policy.
Okay.
There's a question here that says, would the panelists say we have a masculinity-ridden patriarchal policy makers? So would you guys say we have, maybe I must rephrase this question because it says, would the panelists say we have a masculinity-ridden patriarchal policy makers? I wouldn't want to call anyone a patriarchal policy maker, but I think the conversation, maybe the question we must answer here is, are the policies actually not, are the policies that we have in the country accommodative enough for women, or are the policies that we can pin out and say, this particular policy is actually accommodative for women, or is trying to actually disembark or dismantle patriarchy? I want to bring in Vessel on this.
Thanks, Annalisa. So 2 comments. I'm really inspired by the feminist writer Carol Gilligan. She defined feminism as a liberation movement. And she said that what feminism does is it liberates democracy from patriarchy. In other words, that there are forms of democracy that are very patriarchal. So that to me is a really exciting framing, because I think in South Africa we have reached so-called documented democracy, but the practical lived experience of democracy is still a far cry from where we are, and I think we still live in a very patriarchal society. In terms of 2 practical policies, I think in the corporate sector, paid equal parental leave is a feminist policy that supports mothers to be able to be regarded the same as fathers. We can afford that from UIF, and private companies can afford that. And the other one, like I said earlier, is universal childcare. Quality universal childcare would also elevate the value of care given to children. I think one of the questions, let me just answer one of the questions that I noticed, and I did comment in the text box, is that a way to increase the value of that kind of care work that's usually associated with women is, for example, to pay ECD teachers the same as we do matric teachers. Because that is, after all, the most important investment in a person's life is in the first few years of their life. Thank you.
All right. I wish we had more time, because we literally left with 5 minutes and then the webinar is out. I think let's do just quickly our wrap up in terms of the lessons that we personally on our individual capacity we should contribute into either with dismantling patriarchy, or we are trying by all means to fight the implications of gender-based violence. We live with gender-based violence, like I said with the beginning of the conversation. You've seen it at home. If you haven't seen it at home, you've seen someone you know going through it. So we all part of this. All need to come on board and be part of the conversation. JP, I want to bring you in on the children's side in terms of the lessons that we must learn as a community, or the lessons that we must send out. What are we teaching? So on your case, you deal with children. What are you teaching children at this particular time? And what are the lessons that they must learn and you have learned in the process?
So for us, I think it's important that children have somebody to talk to. So when they're experiencing challenges in their lives, they feel comfortable approaching the adults in their lives. So that means that while we work with children and our focus is on children, lots of that work actually happens at the broader level. And I think one thing which I'm not sure if I emphasize it enough, and kind of Nikki touched on it earlier, is what are the costs associated with the results of toxic masculinity, say? The costs are enormous. So one study we have found that 6% of GDP is lost as a result of violence against children, which is nearly 5 times the amount of the cost that was estimated to be as a result of violence against women. So I think that also, to just bring it back to business again briefly, is that if businesses see this as an investment case for them, as if government sees this as an investment case, it's not just something that affects, I don't know, isolated families, or every now and again we see shocking cases of violence, but there's this more subtle forms of violence which impacts all of us.
All right, thank you so much, JP. I'm bringing in Nikki. Nikki, lessons that society should learn specifically for you as a woman in a previously male, or it still is male-dominated industry. What are some of the lessons that you have learned, but also you would like to send back to society?
So I want to talk quickly about the fact that very often women don't even know what an abusive relationship actually is. Depending on their history and depending on what they've been exposed to, they can't really define abuse. So this actually has to become create an awareness of what is abuse, and to at what point is the behavior of my partners or family members actually now impacting on my family and creating that vicious cycle of GBV. And I think that this is something that we looked at in depth. We went to the support of Volvo South Africa, where we said, well, the transport industry is so poorly represented in terms of women, and the answer to one of the questions was transport, and specifically to road transport and to passenger transport. How do we overcome this? And we have initiated an incredible program. It's an international program called Iron Woman, which develops unemployed women from being in an environment where they cannot get a job, they've got a basic matric certificate and they can't expand beyond that. Their job opportunities are limited, and we're taking them from not being productive in society and in the economy to having the skills, fully sponsored by Volvo, to having the skills to be able to operate a commercial vehicle safely and effectively, and then giving them the workplace experience so they can build road confidence, and from that finding them employment. These women go from a zero income to a basic of 11 to 12,000 and even more, suddenly changing their home environment and giving them an opportunity to participate. But in doing that and taking responsibility for their program, what we actually do is incorporate, and this for me were the lessons, incorporating conversations and empowering women in terms of budgeting, financial management, career development, gender-based violence and workplace harassment, and the impact of HIV. All of these are topics that we incorporate into our programs to assist women honestly grow and thrive in the industry. The transport sector has so much to offer us. And with a little bit of assistance and a little bit of creativity and a couple of campaigns, I know we can get men on board to see the value, because statistically, women make incredible drivers.
All right. Thank you so much, Nikki. Nikki, lessons, amazing. Incorporate women into bigger conversations, but also men need to be part of the discussion. Empower women, make them economic participants. That's the lessons from you. Vessels, please.
Thank you so much, Annalisa. I think the government of Sweden has traditionally funded advocacy work for women's rights across the world. And I think that's so important, especially with the constrained environment that we're seeing with the gag rule by the US foreign policy and other conditions that create, that really form the bedrock of economic manifestations of violence against women. So please keep doing what you're doing, Sweden and CEDA. And then on a personal level, I think, a major lesson is just to see what the next possible practical thing is that a man can do to contribute towards unpaid care work, because it is a feminist project. Thank you.
All right. I'll close with you, Lebalo.
Thanks, Annalisa. For me, one of the greatest lessons is restoration of human dignity, drawing on justice and what justice is all about. I've come to appreciate and learn more that justice speaks truth to those in power and those without power. And if that can be embraced for what it is, I think something can happen. Thank you very much.
All right. We unfortunately have run out of time. We are just 1 minute after 3 o'clock. I think on our side, I wanted to say thank you again to the panelists. Thank you to everyone who joined in. And really, I think the conversation on its own was insightful, but not only for me as a woman, but also as someone who's hoping one day that they'll bear kids and be a mother one day. I feel like if I have people like JP, Libalo, and Nikki as one of the people that continuously share their insights, but also continuously give us solutions, I think we're moving towards a better society. Again, let me send a special thank you to the Sweden in SA Embassy for really being part of this discussion. And the NRF, we really need to acknowledge the kind of work that you guys do. You guys have been doing exceptionally well in terms of the research that you guys put out and in terms of funding women in most of the projects. So really, I hope this discussion was just round one of many discussions. Personally, as a moderator, I think I'm currently wishing that I had more time, because there's so much that we can get through in the discussion, because it's quite broader than just the 30 minutes or the 45 minutes that we had.